All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final day of Duke Sports Entertainment Law Symposium 2021. Today's conversation will be with Grant Hill. My name is Zach Flagel, and I'm a 3L here at Duke Law.
And hello, everyone. My name is David Duncan. I'm a second-year law student here at Duke Law. And for this year's symposium, we are focusing on the future of basketball. On Monday, we've heard from the NBA Commissioner, Adam Silver. Yesterday, we had the opportunity to hear from Executive Director of the National Basketball Players Association, Michelle Roberts. And today, we have the honor of concluding our symposium with NBA Hall of Famer, Grant Hill.
Grant is one of the most accomplished NBA and college players of our generation. He was inducted to the Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame as a member of the 2018 class, and also inducted to the Duke Hall of Fame as well. As a seven-time NBA All-Star and two-time NCAA champion, he's made a successful transition from 19 years as a professional athlete to leadership in business, along with several television broadcasting roles. Among his many roles today, he's a co-owner and vice chairman of the Atlanta Hawks, sits on the NCAA Board of Governors, and as of last week, was named the incoming managing director of Team USA Basketball. Grant, I could go on and on about many of the roles and accolades that you have had in your career, but we're so excited to host you today, such a decorated Duke legend in our midst. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you both. I'm excited to be here to join you in the symposium, and it's certainly very flattering and humbling to know that I'm in rarefied air with the two of you and Michelle Roberts and Adam Silver. So I'm excited and looking forward to an enjoyable conversation.
Thank you so much, Grant. Before we got into the specifics of basketball, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't just kind of acknowledge what's happening in our country, kind of similar to the events of last summer, the social justice tone that the news have taken. Obviously, as people of color, we understand that this has been happening in our country for centuries. But obviously now, with the renewed emphasis that the NBA and other sports leagues is looking at, particularly the fight for social justice. Actually, Silver referred to it on Monday as sports as a form of integration, kind of the earliest form in which Black people were able to get involved and kind of enter white-dominated spaces. And I'm just curious from your perspective, seeing how sports has evolved over time, how has it contributed to the improvement of race relations in the country, sports as a form of integration, and maybe your commentary on what Silver had to say there?
Well, I love what Adam said, and I think there's a tremendous amount of truth to that. Sports has certainly played a role, I think, in race relations and making progress in this country. I think of sports and the power of sport just in general, and I'm mindful as a history major and going back to the ancient civilizations and the ancient Greeks and the Olympics, and understanding that in years that there were Olympic Games, they would halt wars to put on those games. So even then, they understood the power of sport and how sport can really resonate with people. It inspires you. There's something about sports that really we're all connected to. Certainly that's magnified in present day, and through the years and through at least my association and my relationship, as a fan, as an athlete, and the number of roles that I serve in now, I believe, sports has played a huge role, whether it's integration, whether it's having athletes of color in positions that are the faces of franchises, that are, marquee names that help transcend the sport in terms of their excellence and helping grow the game of basketball globally. And I think that's carried on in this current environment where, now athletes, not just NBA athletes, but WNBA athletes, male, women in all different sports, this generation sort of understanding the power of their voice and using that voice to affect change. And so you can go back to Jesse Owens in the Olympics and in Berlin. You can talk about Ali, and just there's a number of athletes through the years that I think have played a role to advance the cause and ultimately, help with progress. More progress is needed, no doubt. but I think sports has played an important role in that.
And honestly, I really couldn't agree more. I love that you mentioned, athletes like Jesse Owens, Muhammad Ali, Bill Russell, right, in the sport of basketball. Various athletes, Black athletes in particular, who have made an impact in progressing society and making it better for African Americans in this country. I kind of view you, and transitioning a little bit now to your college basketball career, kind of view you as kind of one of those figures at Duke, right? In the 90s, winning two national championships. And at least in the Black community, Duke wasn't always a place that, Black people were first to support, right? And there was a lot of contention, at least in the 90s, around race relations at Duke. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what was the perception of Duke when you were there for Black athletes at that institution? And how has it changed over the years? Obviously, now we've got Zion Williamson, Jason Tatum, Cam Reddish, various of the Black athletes who've gone here. And I feel like the tenor and the change, the perception at Duke has definitely changed. So I'm just curious, how do you think it's changed since your time in the 90s?
Well, it's interesting. First and foremost, I'm a lot older than the two of you. So back in the early 90s when we were there, it was a different time. You didn't have social media, you didn't have technology. You were, I hate to use this word because it's been used often this year, but you were more in a bubble, more insulated from sort of the court of public opinion and what perception was. And so, early 90s at a private institution like Duke University, naturally as an African-American student athlete, as an African-American student, there were issues that were relevant and things and concerns that we all had as part of the student body. But what's interesting is, we were kind of unaware of sort of this groundswell of just this feeling and emotion, I guess, that particularly Black America had towards Duke. My friends at other schools, the other predominantly white institutions, whether at University of Virginia or Georgetown or Georgia Tech. I won't mention Carolina because I didn't have too many friends who were student athletes at Carolina, but they all kind of had the same feeling about being a Black student athlete at their respective schools. So, when teams would come to Cameron, the Cameron Crazies would boo them, and they booed everybody, and they were, the best fans in all of college basketball. And when we went everywhere else, they booed us. And so I think we were slightly unaware of this sort of feeling and sentiment at the time. I think later on with stories and documentaries and films, and I think you sort of begin to sort of understand that. But we were very insulated from that. Obviously, 1990, when I arrived on campus, was more than 30 years ago. I see Duke now and how it's evolved and continuing to evolve. But there were some challenges there on campus just as a Black student that I think we all were in the midst of. But, it is amazing. I think, in the court of public opinion, I think Duke basketball has more street cred now. I'm not entirely sure why or how that is. Maybe it's embracing the one and done culture. But I really looking at, during that time and back in my teenage years, like we were slightly unaware of what sort of the rest of the world was thinking. We were loved and hated in Durham, and depending upon your allegiances. And there were many folks in Durham County who were big fans of Duke, and there were many who were big fans of North Carolina. And so, but it was still a fun time, of course, naturally, to be there on campus. A lot of activity on campus as a student. The team was certainly reaching some incredible heights. And we played at a time where, you didn't really have the one and done cult. So you had a chance to be there for 4 years, to really connect with the school, with the community, with the fan base. And I'm glad I played and went to school at the time that I did, because there would be incredible pressure now to only play for 1 year. And I feel personally, I would have missed out on so much if I had only been there for 1 year.
keeping the focus on the college game for a second, I want to move up to today, and at least in the last few months, few years, the types of pressures that we've seen the NCAA face of late, specifically from the Supreme Court a few weeks ago, heard an antitrust case, Congress considering broad scale legislation, state governments in the NIL front, and perhaps most importantly, the court of public opinion. The NCAA is facing interesting pressures from a number of different areas. And I know that you're on the NCAA Board of Governors, the highest governing body for the NCAA. How do you feel the NCAA is handling these pressures? And, you know, looking forward here, you know, 2021 could be a big year in just the ground underneath the foundation of college sports might be shaking a little bit. What do you see the way forward here as the best path for the NCAA?
Well, I don't know if I have all the answers in terms of the best path, but it's definitely an interesting time, really fascinating. The NCAA is I think in the midst of evolving, and that's exciting. To me, it's a great opportunity. Certainly, you touched on a few of the issues that are at least immediate and pressing. You know, the antitrust, the Alston case, as you mentioned. The name, image, and likeness issue as state legislatures are rolling out different laws. I think the NCAA, by and large, agrees with this name, image, and likeness. They also feel there needs to be some uniformity, and you can't have different rules necessarily in different states. And so a lot is sort of happening right now, and this also in the midst of COVID. And you know, one of the main revenue generators is the main revenue generator for all of college athletics. 1,200 schools that make up the NCAA come from the NCAA tournament, which was canceled, right, we all know, last year. So, you know, it's been a challenging year in a lot of ways. But, you know, I think change sometimes can be challenging, and change can be at times painful, but it's also necessary. And, so, you know, I think there's a couple of things. You said the court of public opinion or the perception. You know, I'd like to say first and foremost, like I've been an activist as a former student athlete. I've spoken out against some of the rules in the past as it relates to the student athlete. I like to think now I'm an activist on the inside, and I offer a perspective as someone who's been there. Who's been a student athlete, who's been around the sport. As you said, an independent director, so I'm not in the NCAA as a college president. But it is challenging, and it's stimulating. I care about the sport. I care about the intercollegiate student athlete experience. But a shift is occurring. And, you know, I think it's the right time. I think we have to be thoughtful and intentional. It's a little bit nerve-wracking because it's out of your control. I do think that there's this idea, though, that the NCAA is like Google or Facebook, and there's a strong cash reserves, and there's billion-dollar war chest and whatnot. And look, $1 billion is what's generated, but, you know, 97% of that money trickles down to the schools, and really funds a good portion of all the schools' athletic programs. And so, you know, the NCAA does two things. The NCAA puts on championships in all sports, and the NCAA also enforces rules. They don't come up with the rules, but they enforce the rules. The rules are put together by the schools themselves. And so, you know, it's just an interesting sort of perception issue and public relations issue. Now, with that said, the NCAA is, you know, it has some flaws and you know, and has made some mistakes. Certainly, we made a mistake with the recent championship on the women's side, and I think everyone is well aware of what happened there, and so that's unacceptable. And there's certainly an investigation by an independent law firm who specializes in gender equity and Title IX issues. So, but as a former athlete, I mean, I look at losses as chances to improve and chances to, you know, self-reflect. How can you get better? And I think, you know, the NCAA, as it relates to that, what can we do differently with the women's championships and all women's championships? I'm a father of 2 daughters who are very much into sports. My one daughter is hoping to play soccer at Duke down the road. She's a 7th grader currently, but she's pretty special. But if there's 500,000 student athletes in all of all the divisions, Division 1, 2, and 3, half of them are women, and half of them get an opportunity to compete at a high level. You have athletes, female athletes from all over the world who don't have that luxury in their respective countries to compete and play their respective sports at the highest level. Well, the NCAA provides that, provides that for women. So I'm someone who sponsors a women's AAU basketball team, who has daughters who are heavily into sport. I really appreciate that and value that. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And so, mistake was definitely made. The ball was dropped, no pun intended. But there's a lot of pressing matters and issues. And, I honestly don't know what's going to happen with the Alston case. I'm not sure what direction that'll go. Questioning the legality of limiting compensation for student athletes. So that could, sort of this whole idea of amateurism, it could really change, what intercollegiate athletics looks like. And there also could be some unintended consequences as a result. And so it's an exciting time, but also slightly nerve-wracking as well, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, as a fan myself and a student of the business, I completely agree with what you've just said. I want to pick up on one of your points in particular, and that's the insider's voice that you're able to provide for college athletes. I know in 2019, as I mentioned, you were appointed to the NCAA Board of Governors, and you were selected to fill, at that point, a newly created independent seat, specifically designed to add objectivity and a diverse perspective to the board. So I imagine you were probably selected for your college athlete experience. If you're not the only college athlete, former college athlete on the board, at least you're the most standout one, I believe. So do you feel a responsibility to represent the perspectives of college athletes on the Board of Governors? And how are you able to use your experience in that role?
Well, I mean, I can offer my experience, though, is very different, or was very different than, the climate and experience of today's student athlete. And certainly a lot has changed. The environment, the pressures, the dynamics are very different. But, obviously that's something to pull from. I think my association with the NCAA in this role, it really started with the Rice Commission in lieu of the Southern District of New York's federal investigation into, some illegal activities, I guess, related to college recruiting and basketball. And so at that point, the NCAA put together a commission, a task force led by Ambassador Condoleezza Rice, and I was one of 12 members of that. And we worked to make recommendations to the structure of the NCAA. We didn't have purview over amateurism or name, image, and likeness. But one of the things that was important to us was most organizations, most Fortune, publicly traded companies, nonprofits, even schools like Duke, have at the director level have a level of independence, and the NCAA didn't quite have that. The Board of Governors was consisted of college university presidents, and so we recommended 5 independent directors, and then during that process, I worked closely with Condoleezza Rice, and I'm even weirded out by saying this because I never thought in a million years, but I was almost like her lieutenant on this commission. But after our work was done, she basically recommended to me that I should be on the Board of Governors. And you can't say no to Ambassador Rice. And so, but she, I'm glad she did. I've enjoyed it. Like I said, it's incredibly challenging. It's a chance to serve and give back, and hope to be a part of this sort of association evolving. So all of my experiences, my experience as a student athlete, as a broadcaster, as a professional athlete, my connectivity to the NBA and the numerous roles that I'm in now, I think it just lends itself to having diversity of perspective. And I think we all know the importance of diversity of perspective and experiences and how that helps ultimately making decisions. So, I'm aware through my own children and certainly through various, friends and family and athletes that I might cover who are current student athletes. But I'll tell you this: the Duke basketball experience and the men's team and what they, what they've gone through prior to arriving on campus and what they go through now is very, very different than what we went through back many, many years ago.
And I love that you mentioned diversity of perspective, because in reality, you have a lot of hats in your closet that you wear, and you kind of navigate in and out of different spaces and different roles. And I'd love to talk a little bit about the hat that you wear as an owner a co-owner of the Atlanta Hawks. Obviously, from my perspective, the Hawks have played a really integral role on improving their local community, whether that was, getting the rights to have MLK jerseys to kind of honor his legacy in Atlanta, whether that's the voting rights campaigns that y'all have done. There's been a lot of activism from the Atlanta Hawks, at least from my perspective, that they've done on behalf of their communities. And to me, it kind of contrasts a little bit from other owners' perspectives. Obviously, quite obvious, the Donald Sterling situation a couple of years ago, obviously very contrasting roles and different views and perspectives for social justice in the fight for that. So I'm curious, what roles do team owners have in that fight for social justice in providing their players a platform to share their perspectives and opinion?
Well, I do think, I do think our league is very progressive and is very, there's other professional sports leagues that have tried to mute their players and have tried to fight this sort of player empowerment era that we're in. And I think in some respects that's backfired and it's been a bad look. But, I think Adam really set the tone for his tenure with that whole Donald Sterling situation back in 2014. You come in as a new commissioner, you have, one of the most innovative and certainly the gold standard in commissioners in David Stern. You're following him. And, within 6 months, this issue is dumped on his lap. And I think he really, set the tone for his leadership style. I think he endeared himself to everyone, but in particular the players. And as we've gone forward and a number of these unfortunate incidents have occurred and players have become more outspoken and more comfortable with their platforms, he's embraced it. He's totally embraced it. He understands the value and the importance of exercising your right to freedom of speech, speaking your mind, and using sport to affect change. And so, I think ultimately we're partners. The owners and players are. We have a collective bargaining agreement. It's 50-50 partnership, splitting the basketball-related income down the line. And I think we do a good job, and I can only speak really in Atlanta, of embracing that, and encouraging, if comfortable, speaking out. And we want to support. We want to be helpful, and typically when change occurs, it occurs with the young generation. And so I admire, I respect, and I applaud what this generation of players has done and is continuing to do, and in particular with our young players. So, we try as well. We understand that at the end of the day, we're stewards of this franchise. This franchise ultimately belongs to the city of Atlanta. It's important for us, obviously, to put a good product on the floor, to create wonderful in-game experience, whether you're in our arena or you're watching on TV or listening on the radio. We also understand we want to, do everything we can to enhance the city of Atlanta. We're representative of the city. But the most important thing is to serve the community. And that's kind of how we evaluate ourselves. Are we, we doing all these things that we're supposed to be doing? And so voter suppression, obviously an issue that's in the state of Georgia last summer on the heels of George Floyd. We thought, why not open up, our arena and have it be a polling center and have it be the largest polling center at the time in the country. And as we saw the results of the election, it came down to Atlanta, came down to Georgia. And so now we didn't tell people who to vote for. We are bipartisan. And, but, just finding a way to be a part of the solution and using our resources, using our brand, using our arena to try to be leaders and set the tone. And so, we're very proud of that and the continued work. I mean, there's so many things that our franchise is doing. So it starts with our managing partner, Tony Ressler, all of our partners in ownership, our CEO. We were the first team to have a chief diversity inclusion officer, over 7 years ago. Atlanta's diverse. Atlanta, to me, embodies and represents, what diversity is. And so we should reflect all that Atlanta is. And we've certainly tried, but there's still more work to be done. And we're excited about that work and getting it done.
I'll have to add in here, as an Atlanta native myself, it's really impactful to have such an inspirational ownership team who is leading the community in this way. So as on behalf of Atlanta natives, thank you for embracing your role in that way. I want to pick up on one of the threads you mentioned, and that's this era of player empowerment that we're seeing in the NBA. Obviously, we've seen it both on the social justice front, but also with the trend towards super teams and players using their platforms to direct which teams that they go to, perhaps now more than ever. We've seen big markets like Brooklyn and LA building their super teams in such a way that the NBA now is in some way has a dichotomy of the haves and the have-nots. And Atlanta has always been viewed probably in the smaller market frame of mind, but nevertheless has still thrived to put a really competitive basketball product on the field, or on the court. I want to get your thoughts on how, as a non-super team type team, do the Hawks go about building such a competitive product?
That's a great question. I mean, I think when we looked back, when I look back in 2015, and when we bought the team, it was really interesting. The city of Atlanta is a great city. It's probably the only real major cosmopolitan city in the Southeast. There's job growth, there's strong, corporate Fortune 500, sort of base there. There's a lot of colleges and universities. There's infrastructure. I mean, it's everything you want in a major city. Quality of life. There's sort of a Hollywood feel with all the music and television and film happening there. So a lot of athletes will live there in the off season or ultimately retire there. There's a lot of fun, great restaurant. I mean, everything you want in a city. But for whatever reason, the Hawks had just kind of been, I don't want to say a dead franchise, but just didn't really have a connection. And so one of our challenges, and we realized and recognized this, was we can come in and add value, but we can build that emotional connection. If you're a basketball fan and you live in Boston or you're from Boston, there's a 99% chance that you're a Celtics fan. And there's a couple of other cities where you can apply that same logic. That wasn't necessarily the case in Atlanta. And so, we've come in and poured a lot of money in the infrastructure and, a new arena and understand, like we remodeled our arena. And one of the things that I learned during the process, and you guys are young, so you'll appreciate this, but it used to be you would go to a game and you might check your phone for emails, you might look for scores, you might, text with your friends. But now everyone is, taking pictures, uploading, And something as simple as upload, it requires 5 times the bandwidth to upload than it does to download. And part of the experience is being able to share that experience with everyone in your network. And so, there's nothing that can hurt an experience more than you taking photos of you sitting on the floor and then not being able to upload it in real time to your social media platforms. So that may not sound like a big deal, but that's part of the thought process and the detail in terms of creating a worthwhile experience for your customers. And so we decided, look, we have to build through the draft, so we did something that's extremely painful, and we kind of bottomed out. But we're on our way. We have a great young star in Trae Young. We're starting to hit our stride. We're 4th in the East. I believe we have a lot of runway in front of us, and we have a chance for sustained success. And so hopefully we can help change that. But there's, every market is different. Every market has its own set of challenges and problems. We're no different than anywhere else. And but we're excited. We're proud of the work that we've done. We're continuing to do the work in the community. Is not only the right thing to do, but it's also, it's also good for, connecting and endearing yourself to your customer base. So it's a full-time job. I mean, we're getting after it. We've done a lot. We're committed to bringing a world-class team and world-class experience to everyone. And we feel like we're on our way, but it's not easy. Winning a championship is not easy. Being a national or NBA champion is the ultimate goal. And we're working hard to hopefully accomplish that one day.
Well, one of the other things I'd like to touch on is the growing trend in recent years of former athletes becoming owners like yourself after their careers are over. So besides yourself, this group includes Michael Jordan, Derek Jeter, and just this week, your new colleague competitor, Alex Rodriguez. So I want to get your thoughts on what do you feel that being a former player adds to the ownership group that you're a part of? And then B, another theme that we've touched on this week with Michelle Roberts and Adam Silver is, should current players be able to get part of an equity stake in their teams, given that, they might be able to provide some of the same value as former players?
Okay, well, to answer that first part of the question, I think, first of all, having more former athletes involved in your business, I think one speaks to just, how the professional sports in general has really just grown, and player contracts and being in a position where players have made enough money to be able to participate on the ownership level. I think of where my dad was, and he signed his first contract with the Cowboys in 1969, and he's proud that it was the $20,000 contract with a $1,000 cash signing bonus. And so to think, and that was it was good money, of course, back then, but the growth of sports, and in particular the NBA, and the continued growth, the contracts currently are through the roof. So it's good. It's a good thing, and I hope that continues for players and for the business moving forward. I think players bring, they bring more than just money. They bring a perspective that maybe a lot of owners don't have, having, played and having gone through all different types of experiences, knowing what's going on in the locker room. We had unfortunately, a coaching change earlier this year, and even navigating that and being able to offer perspective from in the locker room and how disruptive that can be or how good that can be. I think it's just helpful to have that, that seat at the table who can offer, offer what it's like in the locker room. And I feel like my voice is heard and my perspective is valued on a number of fronts, even non-basketball related. So I think that's important, and hopefully you'll see more and more of that forward. Now, in terms of should players participate, I think that's tricky in in terms of, participating on the equity side. I'm a believer, and I've learned this the hard way, but I don't believe necessarily in sweat equity. If you're going to participate on the upside, then you should participate on the downside as well. And there's always a downside, there's always a risk. The business this year has been hit hard, and different teams in different markets are feeling it. But everyone's feeling it. And trust me, we have bi-monthly meetings. And so, the bottom line does not look good. We know we'll get through it, but, players have guaranteed contracts. And so they're high salaried employees, although technically partners. I think it's just a slippery slope if you start going down that road with equity and so on and so forth. I do think that the next television deal will continue to be north of where we are now, which ultimately will, improve salaries even more than where they are now. But I'm sure I know where Adam and I'm sure I know where Michelle stood on this question. But I don't agree with that. I think, if you're going to participate on that level, then you should share on the upside and the downside. And I don't think you can do both, and either your partners or your employees, and if you're a partner, then I don't get a salary in my role as vice chairman of the Atlanta Hawks. So anyway, philosophically, that's my belief. But it's a great question. And I'm sure if it's been brought up, then it might be brought up at the collective bargaining agreement as well.
Most definitely. And I love what you said earlier about having your voice being heard and appreciated in that space. And with the Atlanta Hawks, that's not the only place your voice is also heard and appreciated. Now it's going to be appreciated in the front of the USA Basketball, particularly in your new role as managing. I'm curious a little bit about the dynamics of USA Basketball over the years. It really has a lot of change, particularly with Jerry Colangelo taking over in 2005. He really, a big part of his role was going out and recruiting the right people to train the right players and getting the right program chemistry together. But obviously that doesn't come without its own hurdles, right? We saw a few years back, Paul George being injured while he was playing for Team USA Basketball. You've got a lot of players who are hesitant to use their off season as more work. A lot of these players who are going, later in the playoffs, and they're feeling like they're not having a lot of time off. So I'm just curious, what does USA Basketball need to do to kind of stay in front of some of these growing problems that players are identifying? And obviously, like 25% of the league is now made up of international players, right? There, with Luka Doncic, Kristaps Porzingis, Giannis Antetokounmpo, some of the two-time MVPs doesn't play for the U.S. Team USA anymore, right? And so I'm just curious, from your perspective in your role, how do you prepare Team USA to take on this stronger international competition?
Well, yes, first of all, we're very proud as a league that more than 25% of the players are born outside or from foreign countries. Thankfully, they don't all play for the same country as it relates to the Olympics. But the rest of the world has improved. I mean, you see it. You see the bright young players in our league, the Jokic, the Doncic, Antetokounmpo. I mean, these are foreign players who are dominant and are elite players and MVP caliber players. So this is not a ceremonial position. I mean, I think there's certainly a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done. I think first and foremost, Jerry Colangelo and the job that he has done with the program. You think back to 2004. I think we won the bronze medal. We didn't dominate in international play like we had in recent years. And so you needed his leadership, his vision, and his direction in terms of reestablishing who we are and making it fun and making it cool to be a part of. He went out and recruited and brought in LeBron and Chris Paul and Carmelo and B. Wade, really talented up and coming young players who could be a part of the experience multiple cycles. He also brought in some quality veterans at the time, Kobe Bryant, Jason Kidd, and others who had experience and just a nice, healthy balance in terms of age, but also in terms of skill set and compatibility. and had a great run. And certainly Jerry will continue to lead these Olympics this upcoming summer in Japan, and I'll take over afterwards. So, look, the rest of the world's gotten better. You have to connect with this new generation and really get them excited about the experience. I know what motivates this younger generation might be very different than what motivated my generation. So I'm very much aware of that and sensitive to that. But I think by and large, whether it was my generation, whether it's LeBron James and Chris Paul, I think by and large, they really appreciated and valued that experience. It felt like it was instrumental in their growth and their development, learning how to really, become champions, become great players, and so that's part of the job. Also, assembling a coaching staff, and who the right personalities, the right leader. So it's going to require some work by all means, and of course the goal and the objective is to continue with the great legacy of winning. But there's a little bit of a change occurring, and this younger generation, you said it best, making a lot of money, and what benefits them by being a part of this experience and giving up a couple of weeks, almost a month of their summer to be a part of it. So I'm excited. I get a chance to work with an incredible staff, General Martin Dempsey, who has some connectivity to Duke, and just a tremendous leader. So I'm looking forward to it. And I still, I just started. Literally, I'm shadowing Jerry in a few months. So there's so much to learn and get a better handle on. But I'm excited, and we get a chance to, like I said, continue with Jerry's legacy. Maybe add a few things here, press the refresh button in certain areas. But it's a tremendous honor and privilege, and certainly I'm up for the challenge.
Of course, and definitely there's no other expectation there. And maybe kind of as a last question before we go into the Q&A portion, is just kind of like zeroing in on that expectation, right? I would say USA International Basketball is a little different than men's national team or the women's national team in soccer. Right, the expectations I would say are a little different there. With basketball being such a big American sport, I'd say it's more surprising when they lose than when they win, right? Whereas with the men's national team, obviously the women's national team for soccer has been very successful, but for the men's, it's been like, as long as we get to the Olympics, as long as we get there, right? And so I'm just curious, how are you expecting maybe some of those dynamics to play out in your role, and how do you expect to combat those really heavy and lofty expectations?
Well, I think of my time at Duke. I mean, my 4 years at Duke as a student athlete, like the expectation was to win. The goal every year was to win a championship. And so, I've been in situations where there's not that expectation, and that's no fun. But to have that goal, have that pressure is exciting, and you're playing for something of value, something of significance. So, I welcome that, and I'm excited about that. And, I think it's important to convey that to this younger generation. And look, a lot of these young players have come through sort of the grassroots USA basketball. They've experienced the 19 and under. They've been in the pipeline. So there's some familiarity. And so that program and getting some of these players involved at a young age, I think has really helped over the years. I think it was a genius move on Jerry and the leadership back in 2004. And so you're not sort of selling them at this point at the all-star level in the NBA on the significance and importance of this. Historically, I'd say other countries, players from other countries, there was a greater sense of pride to play international for your country. And that might not necessarily be the same or has been the same here in the US. But really the experience, to play on a global stage, to be a world champion, to have an Olympic gold medal, to have that included in your legacy, I think is important. And it's funny. I'll tell you this real quick story. So, obviously, Coach K coached the Olympic team, 3 different Olympic teams, and inevitably, as a captain later in my career on the Phoenix Suns, before the game, the jump ball, you kind of go center court with the officials and captain on the other team. And I would, if it's Kevin Durant or Kobe or, LeBron, I'd always say that, guys, you're an unofficial Dookie. You've had Coach K as one of your coaches. And they would all smile, and you could tell, like, it really meant something to, like, they really valued Coach K. They valued that experience. They came back and did it multiple times. And so there's something special about that. There's something special that he helped create along with Jerry. And we have to replicate that, moving forward and continue with that. And so it's exciting. Like I said, I don't look at it as pressure. I look at it as, just a wonderful opportunity to have success, and certainly excited about it moving forward.
All right, Grant, thanks again so much. This conversation has been really enlightening. We'd now like to turn it over to the question and answer segment of our conversation. And first up, we'll have Addison Caruso. Addison?
Yeah, thanks for coming to talk to us, Grant. We really appreciate it. I'm just following up on the USA basketball and thinking specifically about this summer's recruitment of players. With the shortened off season, I was just wondering what plans Team USA has to recruit NBA players and kind of come back from what some people might think of as a disappointing FIBA championship a few years ago.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, this is an interesting year. I mean, you think, a lot's happened in the last year, and having just the strain of COVID and the environment that we're all living in. The bubble last year in Orlando, where players were there for an extended period of time, the shortened off season, and then the restart in December, and then a very difficult season this year. Trying to get back to a level of normalcy, traveling, playing in different arenas, essentially being in isolation in large part when you're on the road. The question then becomes, as soon as the finals are over, the Olympics, and are guys going to want to continue? Are they going to, the Japanese government has said that no spectators, but also no family. So essentially you're going back into a bubble for a few weeks for the Olympics. So it's going to be challenging. You're not going to have the normal sort of ramp up or lead up where you can invite all athletes out and go through a sort of a formal selection process, and everything's going to be accelerated. If we've learned anything in the last year, is the ability to adapt and adjust. And USA basketball is going to have to do that. They're going to have a camp, a 2-week sort of camp in Vegas prior to going. But I think it's going to be very fluid, and there's going to be a lot of uncertainty right up until the last minute in terms of who exactly is going to be on that roster. And so this won't be an easy year, and there's, in years past, I think you've had commitments from certain players, certain core guys, certain superstars who've said, hey, I'll do it, I'll be a part of it. I'm not sure that that's the case, or if you'll necessarily get players to honor those commitments this upcoming summer. So I'm not running. I'm not the managing director this summer, but Jerry Colangelo and his staff have been on it, and I've already had a number of conversations about strategy as it relates to this upcoming summer and Summer Olympics. But we'll see. I mean, I think still we'll field a good team, and give ourselves an opportunity and a chance to ultimately try to win a gold medal.
All right. Next up, we'll have Gavin Reynolds. Gavin?
Hi, Grant. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Gavin Reynolds. I'm a Duke Law admitted student from Atlanta, currently working in government affairs for the NFL.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot today about the idea of ownership, and I'd love to get your thoughts on how we can increase the number of Black controlling owners in the NBA, and across professional sports. I know at least from the NFL standpoint, we have specific ownership requirements. Like I think for the NFL, 30% of a team has to be owned by one individual. And I'm sure these rules are different, for different leagues. And there's obviously a number of broader systemic barriers related to wealth inequality. But are there any unique approaches that you've thought about or strategized about as a minority owner that you can think of to help get more Black controlling owners across professional sports?
Well, I mean, I think it's a bigger issue than professional sports. I mean, I think we're very progressive in the NBA and would welcome that. The reality of the situation is, as you see the valuations and the growth and success of the game, that it requires, deep pockets to be able to be a managing partner, to be the controlling owner with the franchise. I think the Golden State Warriors just sold 5% of their team at a $5 billion valuation. And so, my question is, why aren't there more people of color in the Forbes 400 list? And so I think it's a bigger issue in that regard. There's not many people. You need to be a billionaire, essentially, at this point in the game. You need to be a billionaire, and there's only a handful of people of color, or at least African American, who, and one of whom is actually a managing partner in Michael Jordan. So, it is a bigger issue that is problematic. It's problematic here in our country, and one of the things we're proud of with the Hawks is we've aligned with the Rice Center for Innovation and Enterprise in Atlanta, and really just providing capital and resources to minority business owners and trying to help create entrepreneurs, but also business leaders in Atlanta. And but it's access to capital, it's systemic. I mean, it's a number of reasons. I'm not necessarily an expert on why and how, but I think this day and age in most professional sports, the major ones, you have to be a billionaire in order to play in that sandbox, and it's just not many of those who fit that description and criteria necessary for that. And so, and I think it's necessary. I mean, you need to be able to withstand some of the challenges. You have to sort of, we talk about growth and the game continuing, but there's also moments where there's, we may be going through some of those moments now where you have to be able to withstand those challenges. And so to have those resources and to not be, overly leveraged and in a situation where, ultimately you can't, sustain your stake is important, I think, in a managing partner. And so, I think Adam would love to have more former players, more people of color. It's just not many available who, like I said, who fit the description. And forgive me for being long-winded. I apologize for my answers.
I think everyone's here to hear you talk, Grant. So forgiveness granted, pun intended. Next up, we'll have Judge Shema.
Hey, Grant, thanks for being here, first of all, and a huge fan. So you mentioned earlier in one of your answers was that when you boil it down, one of the two roles for the NCAA is enforcing the rules that its underlying schools create. But it seems, especially lately, that the NCAA has a hard time enforcing these rules. You have, a couple examples with Arizona, an FBI investigation uncovered, deep illegal recruiting of high school basketball players, paying players and that kind of stuff. And then with UNC, they admitted to phony classes, probably because they were a worse school than Duke, but, and threw their own program under the bus and avoided completely any sanctions from the NCAA. So I was just curious on your thoughts on this difficulty that NCAA has, and if you feel the need for any changes moving forward.
No, that's a great question. And part of our work with the Rice Commission was to address just that. In lieu of, I think, that particular case at that school down the road in Chapel Hill, the structure as it was, it's sort of a self-reporting adjudication process. And if you don't have cooperation from the school, then that precedent at North Carolina was established where they could just basically say we didn't do anything wrong. And so you have to acknowledge that there was some wrongdoing. So one of the things that we came up with was this sort of independent structure, which I'm actually on the committee. I'm actually the chair of the Independent Accountability Oversight Committee. And what that is basically these complex cases, these cases where there's a lack of cooperation on the part of the school and the NCAA. Either the enforcement division, the committee on infractions, or the school itself can opt for this independent structure. Now, you look at the timing of it, this case, the Arizona case that you alluded to, or the federal investigation that occurred, I think it was 2017 when that was announced. Well, we had a freeze that the federal government said the NCAA could not try these cases until those cases were tried. This independent structure was not formally rolled out until last year. So currently there's, I think, 5-6 schools that are in this process. There's an independent investigators. There's independent panel members who will ultimately try the case, or basically arbitrators, adjudicators who will come up with a decision. The decision's final. There's no appeals process. We should have a decision or two by the end of this year. But when you look at from the very first announcement related to these cases to now, it seems like this has been forever. But the plan is to hopefully have objectivity, to have this independent structure, to eliminate and prevent some of the challenges that have occurred in the past. And the hope is also that it can be expedited and it can be done quickly, and we don't have these situations that drag on, as these cases have dragged on. But we really weren't allowed to form this independent structure until the Southern District of New York gave us permission, which was I think 18 months ago. And so anyway, that's in a nutshell sort of where things stand. And I think we all hope to have these cases resolved soon, and certainly a few will be resolved this calendar year. I don't know if that answers your question, but just to give you a little context in terms of but I think ultimately one of the problems was you read about these cases, you heard the stories, but then there was no accountability. And so, but then sometimes you hear of a case where, a student athlete got a ride home from a coach and had a pretty stiff penalty. And so where's the consistency here, which I think ultimately leads to the poor perception of the association. And so that's been a problem. And so hopefully we can get these cases in the pipeline, get some judgments here, and at least move forward with this process in the future.
All right, so we're near the end of the hour, and as is our custom here, we just want to give you the final word, the platform, to have any final remarks.
Oh, wow. Well, this has been great. I mean, I appreciate the opportunity to come and share some of my experiences. I also just so grateful that, many of you are choosing sort of a profession in sports law. I think the landscape is continuing to evolve, will change, and it's encouraging to know that there are a lot of bright, innovative individuals who want to be a part of this world that we live in. And so I'm just grateful and thankful that I've had the opportunity, that I've had an audience, that actually somebody's listening to what I'm saying. And I hope that I could have been impactful and helpful to this symposium. That's been incredible this entire week. So I just want to thank you guys for this platform, David and Zach, and had an honor and privilege to be here with all of you today.
The privilege is ours, Grant. Thank you so much for joining us today. And to our guests who have been attending our week-long events, thank you so much. Any last words, David? I guess this concludes our 2021 Duke Sports Entertainment Law Symposium. So for me, thank you all for joining, and it's been a really fun and exciting week together.
Thank you all again.
Thank you.